talks about the Wheat Rescue in our community. I really like this product. You don't need to like take a gazillion of them. I just use it when I eat out and I think I could be exposed to wheat. Can you tell us how this works?
Yeah, and that was the thing that prompted us to create the product. So there's two things that have been revealed over the last 4 or 5 years that really drove the existence of this product, right? First thing was, we all know that gluten has a negative response in the gut. It used to be thought that it was only for people with celiac, right? And that makes up only 1 to 2% of the population. So it's not a big prevalent problem, so if you're not celiac, gluten's totally fine. Well, then we developed this whole other category of non-celiac gluten-sensitive people, where these people are clearly having a sensitivity response to gluten, but they don't have the diagnosis of celiac disease. And that can be as much as 25–30% of the population. So that now we've got a larger chunk of the population that is actually sensitive and should avoid gluten at all costs. But studies published about 3 or 4 years ago showed that 100% of people get transient permeability when you eat gluten, even if you don't feel it in your gut, right? Because only 1 in 7 people actually get GI symptoms when they have gluten and the permeability that it causes, right? So that is where things started getting a little conflated, because even I used to think, 4 or 5 years ago, that I'm probably not sensitive to gluten. I don't feel anything negative.
I remember you used to say
right?
that. Yeah, I was like,
yeah. Seriously.
You're all jacked up on so much Megaspore, you can't feel anything.
My gut is resilient, right? It just breaks everything down, digests everything, and everything's fine. And so I would never think that I have any sort of sensitivity or negative response to gluten. But then when you start looking at that data, and they showed that 100% of people that they tested, these are not the people who are in the celiac or gluten sensitive category. These are 100% of non-gluten sensitive people show transient permeability when you consume gluten. What does that mean? Well, when gluten is in the system, once it gets in and gets into the small bowel, it opens up the tight junctions between the cells and creates enough measurable permeability during that acute period while you're trying to digest your food, right? Now, for a lot of people, that's fine. Your body it'll create inflammation, but your body will fix it. And then you create inflammation and your body fixes it, and so on. So you keep doing that, but at some point your body stops fixing the damage efficiently. And then the net result is a net damage, right? I don't know where I am on that list. So my thought was, well, I should just start really dampening my exposure to gluten. So then started thinking about that and kind of making those adjustments. Then comes a study last year that published in the, I think, American Journal of Gastroenterology, that showed that upwards of 50% of gluten-free foods actually have gluten in it. So then we started thinking like, well, what the hell are you going to do now? Like, if everybody gets transient permeability and inflammation from the presence of gluten, and then not to mention the non-celiac gluten sensitive and the celiacs, now you're going out to eat and you're ordering off the gluten-free menu and you're buying the gluten-free stuff in the store and you think you're going gluten-free, but there's a 50% chance you are still getting gluten into your system. They tested 5,624 or so foods out in cafes and restaurants and quick serve places and all that. And they found that up to 50%, like in pizza, it was 50%, in sandwiches, it was like 33% or something like that. But it was a measurable amount of gluten-free foods having gluten in it. So then we said, okay, what is your recourse for that, right? For people who are trying to heal, who are trying to get themselves better, the last thing they need is just more inflammation when they eat food, right? It sets you back on your recovery. So then the solution is either A, you never go out, right, and never eat outside. You prepare everything at home and you are very cognizant of what the source is of everything. But then even if you do that, if you sprinkle a little spice on some of your food, a lot of the spices have wheat flour as a carrier. And you may never think to look at the ingredient list on your spices, but it does. So lots of stuff, salt may have some wheat in it and so on. So then we started thinking, okay, it's probably impossible to avoid gluten completely. So let's create a protective mechanism. And then there's studies on certain types of enzymes that can work in the stomach, which is where it's really important, to actually cut the gluten peptide both on the outside and on the inside, right? So these are called exopeptidases and endopeptidases. So imagine the gluten gliadin proteins. They're all like a long chain, and not a very long chain. They're a short chain actually. And to make them unrecognizable to the immune system that's going to trigger the inflammatory response, you got to start chopping them from the outside and chopping them from the inside, so they just become amino acids. So they're no longer triggering. But that has to start happening in the stomach, because once it starts getting into the small bowel, then you already will start that transient permeability effect. So we designed this product and formulated it in such a way to have really robust gluten-specific digesting enzymes that cut the gluten proteins on the outside and inside, and starts in the stomach. So it becomes your kind of basic protection against inadvertent exposure to gluten. Or if you know that, hey, it's Sunday night football, I'm going to be eating pizza, and there's no way around it, then at least you take that, it provides some degree of protection.
Yeah, and it says just 1. Is that usually, or you're okay with the 1 as a dose?
Yeah, typically 1. If I'm eating a bigger meal outside and I know there are certain friends you go with, it's going to be a lot of food. And so if it's one of those things, then I usually take 2. So it kind of depends on the volume.
Okay.
If I'm eating on my own, I'm eating a reasonable amount, then 1 is plenty. With enzymes, it's a lock and key mechanism, and it's a numbers game. If there are X number of gluten proteins to digest and you only have X number of enzymes, those enzymes can only get to a certain amount in any given period. And so if I know the volume of my meal is going to be bigger, I'm going to throw in a second capsule.
Okay. Okay.